Upgrade the way you trade with the Exness mobile app. Trade with fast execution and seize opportunities.
So what's the time now? Maybe we should give me a few minutes. They always come in. In the light now? How do you turn this light down? Just this one. And not that. And down. You can do that one with the others. Okay. Okay. I think that's okay. Right. Okay, we can start. We can start. Good afternoon, everybody. We have now arrived at the difficult bit, which is what happens next. What happens to Picasso during the war after his terrific assault on the art world with his great work, the Demoiselles d'Avignon? What's the matter? No, I don't like it like. You don't need to. Just turn these ones off. These ones off there. That's it. Okay, I think that's it. Oh, I'd like that. That's fine.
That's fine.
Right, does that sound all right? We can't change the bass and the treble. It needs more treble and less bass, but we can't do that. So let's try and cope with the way things are. So you were listening to the Concerto Rodriguez, the guitar concerto, the most famous guitar concerto, which was actually composed almost exactly the same time that Picasso painted his famous Guernica just before the outbreak of the Second World War. I thought it was very suitable for us to, it's very profound and very slow and very melancholy. So we just left Picasso yesterday, having completely exhausted himself after 3 months of being locked up in his new studio on the top floor of the Bateau-Lavoir, which was paid for by Gertrude Stein, in which he had a huge canvas about 8 feet by 6 feet, which he probably paid for as well. And after 4 months or 3 months of making hundreds of preparatory drawings in which he slaughtered the human face and destroyed all the tenets of Western art, he finally invited his friends. As they went up the crickety stairs in the Bateau-Lavoir,
Upgrade the way you
carrying
trade with the
oil lamps
Exness
and
mobile app.
candles, because of course
Trade with
there was
fast
no
execution
electricity, no
and seize
gaslight,
opportunities
they
in
appalled
milliseconds, no matter
at
the
the
size of
horrors
your
that
order.
met them when these
Trade
terrible
with live
demonic
support
faces
in 15
sort of
different
steamed
languages
out of
and get
this
quick answers
canvas
because
at
time is
them.
money.
It was
Trade with
so
tight and
shocking
stable
that it was
pricing,
hidden for
including
16
the best
years
pricing
and
on
it
golden
wasn't
use
even
soil.
reproduced until
Trade with seamless
1925.
withdrawals.
And you
And
probably
know that
wonder
no
why it's
matter what
called the
happens,
Demoiselle d'Avignon. It's got nothing to do
your
with
money is
Avignon at
yours.
all. That was the
Upgrade to
name of
Exness
the
and change the way you
little
trade.
backwater in
Exness,
Barcelona
born to
where the
trade.
brothels were.
A lot
The
of my
painting was
pimples
always
and
known as the
blemishes started
brothel
disappearing.
by
A lot of
Picasso
it
himself.
has reduced in
He
size.
exhausted himself. I showed you the photo of him looking absolutely possessed by this terrible painting. So what happens just before that is quite seismic. It is the death of, come on, what's the matter? It's the death of Cezanne. Well, Cezanne had suffered rejection every year for 30 years. He used to wheel his paintings out of the salon in a wheelbarrow. So the critics couldn't resist one more tilt at him. And when he died, the obituaries were shrill. Paul Cézanne has died, an artist of little talent, capable of nothing but sketches, an artist who never was. But a few months later, in 1907, about 57 oils were gathered together and an exhibition was held. And at that exhibition, two young men met, Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, both aged about 24 and 25. And they became inseparable. And that was goodbye Fernand, because Georges Braque really replaced Fernand Olivier in Picasso's affections. And a very strong relationship developed. What happened? Why did this happen? It's because this is what they saw. As they looked at these works by Cézanne, they saw that Cézanne was breaking up the very structure of the landscape. Cézanne himself said, when he was looking at Montagne Saint-Victoire, I'm struggling to reach the promised land. And you know, all his life he'd been a violent atheist like all of these young painters. But right towards the end, he said, if I don't feel the completion, the wholeness of the creation in myself, I can't express it. And that's what he was trying to do. So you can see that the landscape is breaking up in a most incredible patterning of colors and shapes emerging from these very late works of Cézanne. This was literally just 2 years before he died. He sees the bituminous quarry and he sees it in terms of angular blocks that sort of teeter and wobble on top of each other. This is going to lead on to the two young men, Pablo and Georges, inventing what becomes known as monumental cubism. So we just look at two examples. I've got an awful lot to try and share with you today, and it's my last talk. He uses the palette of Cézanne which are the olive greens, the dark browns, and the rust colors, the terracottas, but in this very block-like way. And this is just the next year, 1908. They go down to L'Estaque and they start painting landscapes as they imagined Cézanne would had he lived a bit longer. That one is by Picasso, and this one is by Braque. And you can see the world is sort of settling down around cubes and different, very geometric shapes. So this leads on, of course, to a change as we move more into, please could you turn off your phones? Thanks so much. As we move more into monumental cubism, we have more of a metallic sense. The shapes become sharp, quite dangerous, quite blade-like. They become angular, they become colorless. The colors become like camouflage, can I suggest that? You seem to be moving into a world that does not have anything that will relate you to the real world, such as soft flowing lines or natural colors. So the second phase is quite short-lived, the monumental cubism. As we go on into Cubism, and remember they are working together on Cubism, we get into the next period called analytical Cubism. And this is where Picasso is so breaking up the real world that it's literally fragmented, almost to sort of atomic scale of tiny fragments that are reflecting the light, almost as if they're moving all the time. It's almost a picture of physics in my mind. So this is a very interesting portrait of Ambrose Vollard, who was, of course, the man that gave Picasso his very, very first exhibition when he was 19 years old, as I mentioned yesterday. When we look at this portrait, first of all, it looks very like Ambrose Vollard. And secondly, it does more. It seems to enter the interior world. He was a very private man. You imagine the labyrinth of his thoughts, and these crystalline forms seem to express this complex, very isolated personality that he was. I just want to say, I'm going to show you the other portrait that he also makes in 1910, which is his other dealer, whose name was Daniel Henri Kahnweiler. And in this one, it's even more extreme. You find the face, the bodies is completely fragmented. And the thing about these paintings, they are limitless. There's no frame. There's no context. There's no sense of rootedness in anything. There's no natural color. There's no recession. This painting, which seems to be full of the smoke of cannon fire, made me think that these art historians are not very right in what they think, because art historians went to town on Cubism. But I remember only a few years ago, I was looking at some Cubists, and I thought, wait a minute, this isn't how Picasso paints. He paints from the passion. What is he trying to say? He's trying to say the world is breaking up. And what you're looking at is as if somebody's thrown a hand grenade into a mirror and everything's fragmented, and the colors are the colors of rusty tanks and camouflage and abandoned rifles and churned up battlefields. Bear in mind, this is before the outbreak of the First World War. In other words, what I see, because Picasso was a very great mystagogue, I see a prophetic announcement of something to come. But we're going to talk about this a bit more in a minute. So another thought that comes out of this particular phase is I just wanted to sum up for you, quickly pop that in last night, the features of Cubism. One, there's no directional light, no light from one direction that tells you you're in the real world, because there's the sun, and that's the directional light. Light is scattered randomly all over the canvas. There's no perspective. There's no no depth of field. There's no sense of an illusion of going through the painting into another world. There's no context. There's nothing to show us where we are or what we relate to. There's no sense of place. There's no natural color. There are no shadows. And there's no attempt at naturalism. There's no frame. It's unlimited. In fact, it shows us a world breaking up. Now, this painting, and you're going to think I've lost my marbles, which may well be true after this busy week. This painting is Greco's great crucifixion. And I was looking at it in the Louvre a long time ago now, and I thought, what I see here is almost lightning flashing through the painting. Light, clouds kind of ripped and torn. The sky is sort of ripped and torn. The light flashing all over the figure. I see no sense of place. I see no grounding. And I see the hands of the donor sort of floating against the black background. In other words, I see the same kind of qualities that I would see in an analytical Cubist painting. So a bit more research is always necessary, and I found that this great crucifixion of El Greco came into the Louvre in 1906, which is very telling in terms of the dates and how they fit. Picasso was also reading a book about El Greco that was written by the father of Utrillo. So although El Greco was persona non grata in the art world because of his ridiculous expressive elongations of his limbs and all the rest of it, Picasso was definitely very interested in El Greco. Not everybody quite fell for this, and one person who was very negative was actually Leo Stein. That was the older brother of Gertrude Stein. He called it cubistic tommyrot. And he said, okay, Gertrude, you can have the Picassos. I'll keep the Cézannes and the Renoirs. And you know that Gertrude had 110 Picassos, if only that collection hadn't been split up. So Gertrude, of course, loved everything Picasso did, including the Cubist painting. Cubistic tommyrotting. Unfortunately, there was a bit of a sort of hoopoo in the nest in the form of Juan Gris, who was Spanish. And of course, Gertrude had a terrific thing about Spanish being good, you see. This really upset Picasso, as you can imagine. And he, although he's totally untalented in this work, as you can see, I mean, it just doesn't seem to, let me just see, you know, this is not what Cubism does. Just putting in a few angles and breaking up a face do not make Cubism. But anyway, the point was that Juan Gris was exhibiting his work, whereas Picasso firmly refused to exhibit his work anywhere in Paris. And if you wanted to see Picasso's work, you had to go to Gertrude Stein's pavilion, grandly called, in Montparnasse. So really, it was a shame that Juan Gris kind of captured the market for Cubist. And as Gertrude said, the one person Picasso would willingly have wiped off the map was Juan Gris, because he was kind of taking all the credit for this. Now, the next and final phase of Cubism is called synthetic Cubism. By the way, there is a test at the end of this, just in case you thought you were going to get off scot-free. So synthetic Cubism is, color comes back, but it's not related to what you're looking at. The color comes back in terms of design, and the papers are used. There are cardboards, there are corrugated cardboards, there are cards and papers and painted paper and newspaper and magazine, and they are really collages, and they develop a much more classical composition, as you can see in the Picasso on this side here, very centralized composition. I love that flaming scarlet right in the middle, offset against a much bigger block of gold, a lot of black to kind of anchor it on this side. And then the black right down here as well, compared to Georges Braque, which is much more nuanced, perhaps. So with now at that point, I want to just, it's very difficult to do this talk because everything is happening at the same time. We can't be absolutely chronological. At the same time as all of this was going on, Matisse had painted his famous painting, La Danse, which is a huge, big painting of naked people dragging themselves around in a big circle on a green hill. Everybody loved it. But 2 years later, he did a darker version, and that is now completely in sync with these paintings. His second version is this one, and it's much darker, and the dance is no longer a happy dance of naked people dancing on a green hillside. It's become forbidding and menacing and tribal, ritualistic, and even demonic, as wild drum beats seem to overwhelm the simple pleasure of the original natural dance. Dance was in any case an obsession in Paris, but the way the dance becomes darker and darker and darker is very sinister. And of course, the Ballet Russe are arriving in Paris, and they are going to be harnessed by Stravinsky and Diaghilev, and of course, the great dancer, what's his name? Come on, the famous Nijinsky, Nijinsky, to produce The Rite of Spring. But when I look at this terrible dance, these people pulling themselves around, I am encouraged to think about the famous engravings of the 16th century, which were all painted during the plague. And it struck me was that this is a kind of dance of death. When I put that together with the work that Picasso was doing in his studio, in kind of liberating a very demonic aspect of human spirit, you can see that we're heading in a pretty dark direction. So dance then becomes a kind of celebration of ecstatic madness, particularly in this great work, The Rite of Spring. I don't want to be detoured into The Rite of Spring. I mean, we could do a whole talk on that. But just to say that The Rite of Spring is about a beautiful girl who is chosen by the elders of the tribe to dance to death in front of a pagan idol. That shocked Paris deeply. There were riots in the Opera Theatre. This had happened in May 1913. And a ballet was kind of perverted to this dark end. So the real dance of death was about to begin. And this is actually an actual dance of death from the 15th century woodcuts that I was just talking about. When I put Picasso into that scenario, and he's quite young, I see that he is an unwitting mystagogue, that possibly without intending to, he is warning that something very, very big is going to happen in all aspects of culture, not just a question of cities being destroyed, but everything. And it's as if his Demoiselle d'Avignon is a thing that kind of kickstarts all of that. Picasso said, if artists know what they're doing, they're not doing anything very good. Only artists who work from their soul and from their heart without knowing what they're doing, that are moved by their spirit, are really doing something important. I completely agree with that, actually. So as I want you now, and I've just put a few slides together for you to see the progression of what is actually happening, and I've put the dates in red. Can you see down here? Are you all wide awake? And good. Okay, just checking. I'm terrible. I know I'd like to keep my class together. So let's look at them. First of all, we have Kandinsky. He doesn't even name his paintings anymore because he can't name them, because to name them would give them meaning. Composition 8, 1913, Munich, announcing a world in complete chaos. A world in chaos. I mean, there is no other word to describe this work of Kandinsky. A common theme among most of Kandinsky's works in the first 7 compositions, which are not named, is the apocalypse. It's the end of the world as we know it. And he wrote of the artist as prophet. That's interesting. In his book, Considering the Spiritual in Art, very well-known book. He made paintings in the years immediately preceding World War I, showing a coming cataclysm which would alter individual and social reality. So Kandinsky is a very important figure in this. And what he does then, again in 1913, he takes subject matter right out of a painting. He is draining the paintings of a meaning that we can hang on to. We look at this, a slightly different theme. Man becomes dehumanized and becomes a machine. This is a very famous work called Unique Forms of Continuity in Space by Umberto Bocchioni, and it's 1913. You just have to keep your eyes on these dates as we go along. Man is now a machine surging forward. Humanity is being stripped from it. We have the similar theme picked up in England by Jacob Epstein. It's called the Rock Drill, also 1913, also showing that the human being has turned into an unstoppable machine with no humanity. And of course, Jacob Epstein was very arrogant. He said, really, I'm just too important to waste my days thinking of matters military. So, of course, he didn't get involved in the war. Giacomo Ballo, who was one of the Italian futurists, they loved war. They were hoping war would happen. He turns beautiful things like swallows into spinning blades flying through the sky. That also is horrible. And again, 1913, blades and knives. But a totally different scariness in the work of Giorgio de Chirico, who was kind of proto-surrealist, really. In this painting, The Red Tower, again, 1913, keep your eye on that date, because there's a kind of prophetic emptiness. Something either hasn't happened or will happen, or will leave a complete emptiness behind it. You feel, it's almost like seeing an absolutely still reflection on a lake, and it's threatening rather than beautiful. Something is going to happen. Another one by Chirico is simply called The Melancholy of Departure and is the Gare Montparnasse. Well, the whole of the First World War is full of stories about people saying goodbye at railway stations. In England, we had this very highly charged bloke called Wyndham Lewis, and his journal Blast. There only was one actual edition of this, and that's also happening in June 1914. So no one is perhaps surprised, or nobody should be surprised, but on the 4th of August 1914, the Daily Mail had this on the front page. I'll try not to cry. Great Britain declares war on Germany. Declaration last night after unsatisfactory reply to the British ultimatum that Belgium must be kept neutral. The King's message to his Navy, government to take control of all railways, Admiral Jellicoe to be in supreme command of the home fleets, huge crowds cheer their majesties at the palace, and £100 million are voted in the Commons in 5 minutes. German invasion of Belgium with airships. Great Britain is in a state of war with Germany. It was officially stated at the Foreign Office last night that Great Britain declared war against Germany at 7 p.m. The British ambassador in Berlin has been handed his passport. War was Germany's reply to our request that she should respect the neutrality of Belgium, whose territories we were bound in honor and by treaty obligations to maintain inviolate. There was no going back. Henri Matisse, the greatest colorist in Europe, looks out of his door in Collioure in the south of France and just sees nothing. 1914. And we will soon get used to the idea that this was what they called the generation in flames. And this lovely young man is actually Ernest Hemingway, who was a very close friend of Gertrude Stein. I just thought I'd put him in there. So we now have this kind of manic belief it's all going to be over before Christmas, and we have people that are now just ciphers being driven into the trenches in this work by C.R.W. Nevinson, 1914, and this work also by Nevinson. I just want to give you some flavor of what was happening. The reality was beginning to settle in. Art can in fact be nothing but violence, cruelty, and injustice, said the Italian futurists, because they wanted war, they wanted everything to be burnt down. But out of all of that, we find a new triad is emerging. And this is a very interesting team involving Jean Cocteau on the left here, Eric Satie in the middle, and Picasso on the right. And they get together under the auspices of Diaghilev and the Ballet Russe to write a completely democratic ballet. Of course, they're all terrific individualists, and so it's going to be quite hard work getting them together, but they do it. And this, first of all, is to introduce Jean Cocteau, a painting by Amedeo Modigliani up there, a very good portrait of Cocteau there. You know, he obviously took tons of drugs. He was very creative. He wrote poetry and he made a lot of artworks, and he was going to design the ballet. This gives you some idea of what his art looks like. It's very derivative. It draws heavily on the classics. As you can see, the profiles are meant to be classical, mythology, a mythological creature up there, and so on. Not great work, but certainly very much of his period. And then Eric Satie, who was quite bonkers, actually. Somebody said, what would you like for your birthday? He said, an umbrella, please. I've already got 85, you know, and he used to collect handkerchiefs. Anyway, he was completely crazy, and he wrote music with the most peculiar titles, like I put them up here, chilled pieces, driveling preludes for a dog, dried up embryos. When he wrote the music for this ballet parade, he used typewriters and all kinds of washboards and all sorts of things in the score. I've just given him 2 girlfriends for fun, actually. I've given him Suzanne Valadon on one side and that silly girl, Marie Laurencin, on the other. So Eric Satie was probably a Rosicrucian. And this is where Toby should wake up. You will obviously, you probably all know the music, I'm sure you do. But he's labeled as a Rosicrucian because his work has this very sad, sort of circular motion, a sad and mysterious atmosphere, a systematic structure of repetition, no time bars or no bar lines, and triads constantly circling the triad. In the Middle Ages, it was known as the diabolus in musica, the demon in music, in fact. But in this case, possibly a symbol of the Trinity and the Rosicrucians. So that is just a bit of his score there. And, you know, when you listen to his music, you will be able to perhaps pick up these ideas. Picasso, meanwhile, is doing really great. He's married his wife, Olga Koklova, who is a Russian ballerina with the Ballet Russe. They have a baby, a little boy, everything looked good. And they're going to construct this ballet called Parade, just to show you a portrait of Olga. She got very bad depression in the end when he left her, but there she is. So in doing the ballet Parade, the idea was that you didn't see the ballet. Nobody is going to see the ballet. What you see is the advertising for the ballet, which happens out in the street. So you see all the characters in the ballet dancing along the street, playing their musical instruments, and announcing to the world at large that there's going to be a ballet in the theatre. But the ballet is actually what's happening in the street. So it kind of democratizes ballet. That was the idea. This is the front dress, the drop curtain, and I've got 2 pictures because this one isn't very clear. I put this one so you can see the scale of it compared to the people. And you see there's an equestrienne riding on a horse, a circus performer. Apparently, Picasso's first girlfriend was a circus performer, a circus rider. And you see the, here we see the Charlotte, sorry, my brain's just going. What did you say? The Harlequin, yeah. The Harlequin from his very, very early period, one of his first alter egos. A slightly clearer one, you can see the ladder that often features in his work, and so on. So this is some of the images from Parade. You have the horse. No one could actually dance in these costumes. They were terribly heavy and all square. That one, you've got this one, the manager, and you can see that they're very cubist looking. This one, another one, they're all boxy and they're huge. And then this is just a picture of the stage where the whole stage seems to be wonky. And it was actually launched first in Paris. So I just wanted to show you how that directly leads from his synthetic cubism phase in this very, very nice one, which is in MoMA in New York, which is Harlequin from 1915, just 2 years earlier. It's very much layered and built up over layers. So instead of having a session like that, you've simply got recession through the layering going back. Lovely picture, that one. And even better is this one right here. This one here is an absolutely beautiful, beautiful painting. Look at that. Just look at that in terms of balance and design and intensity of color. Everything about it is perfect. It's completely balanced. It's almost a Renaissance painting. It's so balanced, so geometric, so symmetrical. And yet every individual bit is different. So a really beautiful, beautiful painting by Picasso from his synthetic phase, synthetic cubism. I put this in because I think it's beautiful. It's actually a theatrical set by Giacomo Balla, 1917, also for another ballet by Diaghilev, but it's absolutely unmistakably modern, isn't it? Modernism. So the war ends, and Juan Gris paints this very nice painting, which is peaceful and calm, even though the world seems to be cockeyed and falling apart and shutters all falling out. You still have a sense of balance and poise at the center. So that's a beautiful painting by Gris. He obviously came right at the end. And Picasso sinks into an entirely different style of painting. He's now painting, balanced obviously on Van Gogh and on Francois Millet, sleeping peasants, exhausted peasants, sleeping in the straw in the sun. What could be a more peaceful image than that? This one here is just the original painting by Van Gogh, which is based actually on a composition by Francois Millet. But you don't need to know all that, of course. I'm just showing you that this idea of picturesque poverty or of idyllic country life. Actually, country life is very hard. Farming is very hard, but it's portrayed as wonderful and peaceful and sunny. And in this painting, there is something tragic, which you see two people, you see two, are they called scythes or sickles? Two shoes, two people, you see two haystacks and two horses, but Van Gogh was always alone. So it kind of underlines the two-ness that never came his way. So Picasso then moves on to a completely different track, which is now his classical period. And his work, I love it. I think it's really beautiful. You see here, he's now his mother with the baby here on the seashore with very pale colors and very beautiful, clean forms. And he is trying to recapture the wholeness and the balance that we had in Western Europe before the First World War, I think. I think that's the most amazing head of Picasso, chosen by John Richardson for the cover of his very wonderful book on the classical period, which you should all get if you can get it. Really an amazing, wonderful drawing, painting. So this return to order takes us through the 20s, but of course things are beginning to crank up, as we know, and we're going to find quite soon that the next Holocaust is going to come along. But before that, you see that Picasso, like everybody else, goes back to classical Greece, and he is now painting the Greek Kouroi, not as great heroic warriors from the Iliad or something, but as just beautiful boys playing their pipes on the side of the sea, overlooking the sea. This one is a beautiful, quite small work called The Race. Again, the classical influence in the one breast the dress off one shoulder. This is a Greek trope because the classical Greeks, they believed that the left breast nurtured the hero. So they have one breast exposed. But in any case, the way they're running with freedom and joy along the beach, it's an amazing expression of freedom and new beginnings. So it's 1922, and this wonderful woman, Sylvia Beach, decides to take a punt on publishing James Joyce's work, Ulysses, that no one will touch. And she's an amazing woman, and she does a lot for James Joyce. And here he is, the precious angel. Look at him, with his little tiny beard all clipped, not a single hair out of place. He wears the eye patch, nothing wrong with his eyes at all. He just wore that for effect. And you can see, look at him, so pleased with himself. Sorry, I'm not a Joyce fan. I mean, his writing is great, but as a person, no. I actually met his nephew and had a long chat. And he said, he's a wonderful writer, but that's where it ended, really. So Ulysses gets published. He then dumps Sylvia Beach without paying her what he owes her. And we move on. And we then work into surrealism. Surrealism, really launched by André Breton, who is the founder, with a manifesto. Now, in those days, you had to have a manifesto if you were a serious artist. I mean, the Italian futurists had a manifesto before they'd made any art at all. The first thing you do is you have a manifesto. And he launches this surrealist revolution. Now, people have always loved to say that surrealism comes out of the new science of psychology. Everybody's reading Freud and Jung and everything else. But I don't really think that. I think it came out of the unbelievable shock of the First World War. Nobody had any idea how horrific it would be. And in this photograph of a dressing station, Australian dressing station, you can see that this man here has what's called the 1,000-yard stare. Their nervous system was so shot by the pounding of the guns that their nerves broke down and they would just sit and stare. I think that is what gave rise to surrealism, because it is the art of the non sequitur. It's, as they used to say, the rape of common sense. Giorgio de Chirico again with one of his artwork. And if you don't understand it, don't worry. You're not meant to understand it. No one can understand it. It hasn't got a meaning. The point is to drain meaning out of everything at this stage. Picasso, I don't think this is particularly surrealist, but they call it. But in any case, it's the right period. He makes the painting, The Three Dancers, which is in the Tate. And you can see this reverts right back to his love affair that probably caused the death of his best friend by suicide. So you see the figure in the middle is dancing around and around, being pulled by the figures on either side. And you can see that there's an open door at the back, which looks a bit like a cross. She's dancing in front of this kind of very shallow balcony. This figure is very bent, almost like a swastika, looking towards us with an open mouth and teeth, very nasty, and with the sexual elements on the outside of her dress. Here, for example, and so on, this looks like a male profile. I can't really see what I'm pointing at. So this painting, and also it was not painted with proper oil paint, it was painted with house paints. He was quite poor at that stage. Going back, or rather staying on this track of brokenness, we really have to remember that, Einstein published the general theory in 1905 and the special theory of relativity in 1915. And with those great achievements, it took a while for those ideas to sink in. But what they said was that you can't measure anything because you can't measure time because time is stretchy. And you can't trust shadows because light bends. If I look through binoculars long enough, I'll see the back of my head because light bends, because the gravitational force of all the planets and stars in space. that this idea that time is stretchy and light bends completely destabilizes our idea of where we are and what we're up to. So it's not surprising that these ideas seem to be reflected in the surrealist, particularly Salvador Dali, in his famous work, The Persistence of Memory. Because you know, memory does distort things. Memory does distort time and does distort what you think happened. So this is quite an interesting painting when you think of it in terms of Einstein and what was happening in physics. Another one from Dali called The Triangular Hour. Again, the triangular hour, showing that Dali is thinking about these things. So it was also, they wanted to get rid of any possibility of meaning by doing automatic drawing, where you don't control your hand and you don't look at anything and you don't plan anything. You simply put your hand on the paper and it does what it wants. Automatic drawing and asemic writing. Now, I hope Julia's here somewhere, but this is a wordless form of writing, because the word asemic means having no specific semantic content or without the smallest unit of meaning. In other words, asemic writing produces a vacuum of meaning. But isn't that exactly what abstract art does? It produces a vacuum of meaning. So in a sense, all of these philosophical and ideas, these current ideas in zeitgeist, are moving in the same direction, which is to suck a meaning out of everything, because we can't trust the meaning. We've just been through the First World War. All these ideas are obviously linked up together. So here is an example of this writing where it has no meaning at all. And of course, with Gertrude Stein, we had absolutely no meaning for about 80,000 words. She would just keep on going. Drawing as well was completely spontaneous and was automatic. So going back to Picasso's, as it were, emotional life, he meets Marie-Thérèse Voltaire on the steps of the Galerie Lafayette in Paris. She's 17, and he says, I'm Picasso, just like that. And that's that, really. I'm sure her mother would have been thrilled if she'd heard about it. And she's 17, and he's about 46 or so. So she's beautiful, she's young, she's actually got a lovely nature, as we find out later on. And he enters a phase of absolute bliss. All the strain, all the harshness, all the angularity, the chopping and the attacking and the aggression evaporate. And they're lovely liquid shapes, dreamy, the light just filtering in through the windows, the soft, gentle skin, the sort of murmuring sounds in the background. He enters the most marvelous summer of 1932, when he makes a great series of paintings all about Marie-Thérèse. That is a gorgeous one, absolutely gorgeous one. This one as well, with a big green delicious monster in the background. The colors are so clear and so strong. It's so sure. He's so sure of what he's doing. This one of the woman in the red armchair is from another one from the same series. And you can see how the arms of the chair sort of become the arms of the figure in a way. And a drawing to show how he evolves these paintings. And he seems to be in a state of perfect happiness. Another one, again, the figures more and more and more simplified, mirror in the background, the colors where you just got that flash of red at the top. And this one is my favorite, actually, showing, it's just called Nude with Green Leaves and Bust. What I found intriguing about this is that the plaster bust of Marie-Thérèse is alive and her eyes are open and seems to be alive, whereas the figure, the living figure, seems to be dead or at least very fast asleep. I'm also disturbed by the fact that the figure is tied up with these great big black bands, as almost as if she's been tied up. I know they're meant to be shadows from the window, but they come over as that somehow she's been tied up. I don't like the fact that it goes right across her neck either. So this just shows you how big that painting is. Here's a photo of Picasso with it. But it is an absolutely amazing painting. Wonderful painting. And this is people came to his exhibitions very smartly dressed. This is the exhibition in the Gallery Georges Petit in June 1932, this good year that I'm talking about. So we now move on to Guernica, which is probably the last big picture we're really going to talk about. And it's huge, it's 25 feet, and it was made after the attack on the Basque town Guernica in northern Spain. The attack lasted for 45 minutes with the aeroplanes flying over and bombing this village completely without warning. And as the people ran from their houses into the fields, they were shot with guns, rifles from the low-flying aircraft for 45 minutes. Picasso had another plan for this great painting that he'd been commissioned to do. But when this happened, he did this instead. And you can see it's all in black and white, as if color is too positive, too happy to be new. It's the most extraordinary painting. Absolutely. It's a great frieze. And he says that I'm just putting these to show you how big it is. So I chose these pictures. So you can see it's absolutely enormous. And when you look at the detail, you'll see the figures that keep on cropping up. The horse from the bull ring with the spear of the picador going right through here. I can't, they're screaming. And the candle that we saw from the death of Carlos Casagemas, right at the very beginning, we've got an eye that looks like an eye with eyelashes, and that naked bulb that reminds one of Gestapo and interrogation. And we've got the bull hovering like a protector over the woman with the baby. I mean, it's very, very, very scary work. He just said that painting is an act of war, as simple as that. And he was actually in Paris, this during the Second World War, a bit after, and there was a picture or a photograph of this in the room that he was in the studio. And the Gestapo, the Germans came in. Now, Picasso had a lot of protection during the war. You know, he was a communist and he was pretty safe. But the German Gestapo came into his studio and looked at this big thing and said, "Who did that?" And Picasso said, "You did." Just like that. You know, Picasso was very, very quick. Going back to what I said right at the beginning, he was a great lover of animals, and the pain of the horses in the bull ring and the pain of the bulls was something that comes back over and over and over again. So we are now, Guernica has happened, and we now have the most terrifying sights in Europe as the build-up to the war. Second World War begins. Just look at these crowds. Just look at them. I had no idea until I was doing this research how huge these rallies were. Millions and millions of people. And as you can see, that the swastika is going backwards. Do you notice that? Most people don't know that. The swastika is going anti-clockwise, which is against the spin of the earth and against the way the swastika should go. Swastika is a very good sign, traditionally, ancient, and it follows the spin of the earth. It goes to the right, which is the correct way that everything should go in art. But it got reversed. So there. And I just want to mention that Gertrude Stein, at this point, was having a terrific time with tons of champagne because she was very protected by somebody called Bernard Fay, who was a big collaborator in France. And she had actually spearheaded a campaign to get the Nobel Committee to award the Nobel Peace Prize to Adolf Hitler. So Stein's bid for this Hitler to get the Nobel Prize was absolutely in earnest in 1938. She also compared Marshal Pétain to George Washington in her introduction to the translations of Marshal Pétain's speeches, which were going to be published, but then they were blocked by Random House, actually. So she lived in France through the whole war, as did Picasso, very safely, because she had protection from the very big French collaborators. Actually, the deportation figures are around 75,000 people who were French, but not quite French enough when it came to the point, not quite. And they were sent off to Auschwitz, and only 3% survived. The reason I'm giving you this, I'm going to tell you something in a minute about what happened to one of Picasso's friends. In the same year that this was happening in 1938, all the Jewish children were deported from her own village in France to Auschwitz. And she wrote that Marshal Pétain's policies were really wonderful, so simple, so natural, so extraordinary. Now, the friend that I'm thinking about is Max. Max was loyal, wonderful, clever friend of both Goethe Stein and of Picasso. Of course, he knew them all. He lived in that Bateau Lavoir, as I told you yesterday, and he became Christian, but it wasn't a way of being safe. It was a deep commitment. What happened was he saw a painting, probably a modern painting, of a Christ figure sort of struggling up a hill alone, carrying this cross. And something in him twigged that that's a Jew. That is the most persecuted Jew in history. And he bonded. Anyway, he became completely Christian, and he lived in an abbey with the monks for a long time, decades, until the war came. He wrote to his friends. He wrote to Picasso, wrote to Goethe, can you please help me? And, oh, he'll be fine, the scamp. He'll get out of it, you know. You know what he is. He'll be fine. They did nothing. They just drank champagne. And he was rounded up, put into a holding camp in Drancy, where he died before he could be sent to Auschwitz. I'm trying to tell you the true stories, because great people are also not very nice people, you know. So Gertrude, of course, goes on to survive. And now this is the bit we're going to have to end with, and I've got just the right amount of time to tell you. So what we're going to do now is you're going to use your perceptive skills. We're going to look at a wash drawing, a sepia wash drawing that has not been attributed, okay? It's not attributed, not by Picasso, not attributed. We're going to work out whether we can find out if it is by Picasso. So what we see here as we look at it, we see a figure on a horse with arms raised up like that. We see a bent figure with the knee going like that, face forward with the teeth showing. And we see a horse with its head up screaming. We see a kind of pantomime horse here. And we're going to see, is it or isn't it a Picasso? Let's first of all go to, I wanted to say the reason we're doing this is at the end of this, which will only take a few minutes, I want to show you how we can look with an occult technique to see what's really going on in Picasso's mind. So if we think about what I just shown in the three dancers, which was 1925, I think you will see that this figure on the left, which is a kind of bent figure dancer facing us with the teeth, is rather like the left-hand figure of the work that we're just looking at. Can you see that? You just have to say yes or no, or yeah? Can you all see quite clearly? I don't know if you, so you can see the figure here is very bent. And I wish I could see this, the teeth, but you can see the attitude is exactly the same, both sides. What is different is the black, well, not really, but there's this black line that comes like that. I can't tell you about that because you won't sleep for the next 6 months. No, when I found out about that, I really can't tell you. But anyway, that's definitely very important. We go to the next thing, and we see the figure in the middle is a dance, an equestrian, a circus performer, doing this, riding on the back of a horse. But I think picking up exactly the attitude of what the central dancer from the three dancers. And that figure is quite definitely a crucifixion attitude, definitely, because the blue door becomes the top, the downward of the cross, I mean. So you can see that those are very, very clearly matched as well. Also, the figure on the horse looks like the figure from the drop curtain for Parade, does it not? You know, with the dancer, circus dancer on the back of the horse. We go on to the right-hand side, can see that the profile of this figure here is exactly the same as the profile on this painting, which is the three dancers again. So the bottom part of this figure on the right looks like a sort of cartoon horse, a pantomime horse. And we can see that it could well be based on the pantomime horse from Parade. So I think we can see a great deal in this work that confirms absolutely that it was by Picasso. Now, again, the horse in the middle, screaming with his mouth open, prefigures the horse in Guernica, which was painted exactly 2 years later. Up here, this is Guernica is just 2 years later. But you can see it's exactly the same as the horse over there. Now, one thing we could do, which would be lovely, is to find out if there's a fingerprint, because the police had discovered fingerprinting in the early 19th century, and the artists picked that up. So you just put your finger on the printing ink and stick it onto your prints, and there you've signed your work. Well, they were all doing it, and Picasso did it. And right down here is a fingerprint, as clear as day, and it's somewhere down there. So this work, this wash drawing, was sent to the Picasso Foundation to be identified. And they had it for about 4 months, as far as I understand, and they simply refused to identify it, even though there was a fingerprint. Why? They don't want it unattested. Well, they don't want a new Picasso, original, sort of washing around in the art world, in the art market. Can you imagine how much it would, they just didn't want that. So they wouldn't identify it. Now I'm going to do this very scary, if you give me 1 second. We are going to look at it and we're going to try and find out about what was really going on in Picasso's psyche, which never left him from childhood. So we're going to use mirrors. In the occult, mirrors are used a lot. Now imagine you've got a mirror, and the mirror is going to be standing like this, right? That way. Can you see what I'm doing? There's the artwork. The mirror is this way against it. Have you all got that?
Yes.
And we're going to look at the right-hand side first. So we're going to look at this side with the sort of Parade figure first. The mirror is right against it, and you're going to see that duplicated. If we do that and we look at it, and remember, artists don't plan what they do, it just bubbles out. Look, when we do that, what are we going to see? A terrifying bull pounding towards you, and you're in the bull ring, and you're going to be stampeded to death. I just think that seeing the bull ring and bullfight when a very young, age 4, 5, 6, 7, absolutely traumatized him for life. We go back to the painting, and we're now going to put the mirror on the other side. We're going to look at the left-hand side, and what are we going to see? Let's see. We're going to see a terrible demonic crucifixion. We see up here, can you see the arms stretched out on the head? This is a terrific, horrible mask. There's a kind of skeleton figure down here. And these two figures become horrible, grinning figures at the foot of the cross. Again, what I showed you yesterday, there's terribly frightening nighttime parades that were held in southern Spain. So that is what I feel. I feel that Picasso had these horrible things in him from childhood, and it didn't take much to trigger it, to bring it out. But he overcame it in this most wonderful print of the whole 20th century, which is in the same year, exactly the same year, which is 1934-35, and it is the girl with the dove leading the blind Minotaur. And when I see this, I think there's hope for humanity. Here is the Minotaur. He's been locked in the labyrinth for decades, millennium. He comes up into the night sky. He's blind because he's never been out in the light, and he can smell the night sky and smell the stars. And he's a pilgrim, has his pilgrim staff. He puts his hand on the shoulder of the child, who is so pure she doesn't see the horror and she doesn't fear him. She doesn't see the nasty. She is just there. And he puts his arm on her shoulder and she leads him on, and she carries Paloma, the dove. And it's a beautiful painting of hope, that even if the monster comes out of the labyrinth, somehow hope will lead him to the right place. The very last one is the little girl holds up a single light, a tiny light in darkness, and the huge monster that's coming pounding towards her stops because he just can't look at the light. Right, Picasso was an extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary man. He died in April 1973. It snowed. as if the gods themselves are upset. His body was brought back to Chateau Vauvenargues, which is here on the behind Montagne Sainte-Victoire. And he used to say, Cezanne painted it, but I own it. It's his favorite thing. His body was actually buried in the terrace of Chateau Vauvenargues. And I don't want to talk too much about the funeral because it was a disaster for his family because his wife wouldn't let them come and so on. So that is where he is buried, leaving behind an incredible legacy, which is yet to be properly explored. Pablo Picasso, just more real than most people. I really love that. Just more real than most people. He said the purpose of art is washing the dust of daily life off our souls. So it's Pablo Ruiz Picasso, born October the 25th, 1881, and died on April the 8th, 1973. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. Can I just ask you before you break about next year? It seems that it seems that summer school is going more towards science subjects, I've been told, and less cultural things.